Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for Long Beach Symphony's Musically Speaking series, hosted by our music director, Eckart Preu. My name is Kelly Lucera, president of the Long Beach Symphony, and we are excited to bring you this virtual series featuring interviews with world-class performers, conductors, and composers, combined with artistic topics relevant to today's world. This evening, we are thrilled to welcome accomplished operatic bass baritone and friend of Maestro Preu, Kevin Deas, live from New Jersey. And now, please welcome to our virtual stage, Musically Speaking host, Long Beach Symphony Music Director Eckart Preu, and the very talented Kevin Deas.
Thank you, Kelly. And thank you, Kevin Deas, for joining us today. Welcome, Kevin.
It's my pleasure. Thank you. Welcome. Thanks. It's great to be here.
Kevin, you've performed with many of the major opera companies and orchestras in America and abroad. Just to get the basics out of the way, your voice type is characterized as bass baritone. Can you tell us what exactly that actually means? Because there are quite a few differentiations when it comes to the definition of a voice type.
Yes, I consider myself a bass baritone because I have a low range and then I kind of have a higher mid range. And so it's kind of a good vocal category to be in because there's a lot of repertoire that fits in that range. And so, yes, I think as I get older, I'm a little bassier than I was when I first started out. But I think it was a good thing that I started learning as a baritone so that I could feel comfortable singing at the top of my range. And it's a wonderful repertoire to be able to perform.
So it is a self-imposed definition of your voice. It was not someone said, Kevin, you are bass baritone.
I think so. I mean, my voice was always comfortable in the lower range. And so when I sang with choruses and did solos as a young singer, I sang more in the bass range. And so, yeah, I think it was somewhat self-designated, but I also think it was kind of obvious that that's where my voice wanted to sit.
All right. Because you also sing a lot of Verdi, which, goes pretty high up as well.
That's right. That's why I consider myself more of a Verdi bass than a Verdi baritone. Because singing a role like Iago, where you have these high A's and G's and that kind of thing, that's not really the kind of range. I tell my friends, I don't mind visiting, but I don't want to move in there into that singing.
You're not what they call a lazy tenor, and your voice definitely does not sound like it.
No, it is.
How did you discover that you had a voice for opera or a voice at all? I mean, were you singing as a little boy, just wandering around singing and said, oh, I think I could do this?
I used to love singing as a little child. My mom used to conduct a gospel choir down in Arkansas, and I would sing soprano in that choir. And then, so I just enjoyed the whole process of singing. And we had a lot of singing in our house. Both my mom and my dad, they weren't professional singers, but they loved to sing, and they came from families who loved singing. So it was kind of always there for me. And then when my dad was stationed in Alaska, he actually sang Messiah solos. And that's where the whole wonder of classical repertoire first presented itself to me. And it's been a love affair ever since.
And so 2 years ago, in December of 2019, we performed together You're a Mean One, Mr. Grinch, with the Portland Symphony in an arrangement that was created for the Long Beach Symphony. So that's how this all fits together really, really nicely. So it's really a small world. And we did 14 performances of The Grinch, and something happened at every performance that I've never experienced before. At every performance, as soon as you started to sing You're a Mean One, the audience seemed to gasp. And my running theory was this happened because of this amazing sound coming out of you. It always reminded me like as if James Earl Jones would sing. And maybe he does. I have no idea. But that's what he would sound like, I imagine. I don't know.
Yes.
In any case, I mean, how much or how hard did you have to work on your voice for it to become the way it is now?
Well, I think part of the thing you have to commit to as a young bass, and even as you get older, is that the voice starts to settle, and a lot of the colors that you want to hear in your sound, even before they're actually sounding, you want to prepare the grounds for that sound to develop and evolve. And so a lot of it's the one voice category where getting older isn't a bad thing. For higher voices, it kind of tests you when you get in later years, but bass voices tend to grow richer and deeper. And I guess the temptation is to kind of impose that richness on the voice at an earlier age. And unfortunately for some of my colleagues, when you make that kind of imposition of sound that isn't kind of organic and connected, you're using up what you might have had that would have come in naturally and maybe even in a more beautiful way. So there's pressure because you want to make money and you want to perform. And so there definitely is a temptation to try to impose a darker sound on the voice. But I was patient and felt as if it was good to sing the right kind of repertoire and let the sound develop on its own.
Right, right. I mean, you're much in demand for what's kind of now called your signature role. The title role of Porgy and Bess.
Yes.
You performed it with many big. You performed it with the New York Philharmonic, with the Philadelphia Orchestra, and so on. Do you feel that conductors or directors typecast you only because you're good at something and said, well, I want to sing Handel too, and other things?
Yeah. Well, in a way, I was fortunate that I started off with Handel and the masterworks from the classical and romantic period, Verdi Requiem and these works. And so I felt pretty secure in the sense that that's where that I had that kind of repertoire available to me. So when Porgy came, it was relatively late. Now, I loved the music of Porgy. Gershwin poured his heart into that score, and it is considered the quintessential American opera. And so but there was still this feeling that I wanted to resist doing it early on and really being fully typed as that in that role. But as I felt again more secure about singing the repertoire that I think I was more intended to sing, I felt that I could approach that and explore singing the role of Porgy. And as Bess says, I loves Porgy. I mean, the music is gorgeous. And when I performed in Europe, singing in many of the major houses, it was always a challenge because you have to get down on your knees. This was a very traditional staging of Porgy. And so I was on my knees for, about 2 hours in the evening. Physically very difficult, very challenging. But as soon as I got on that cart during the overture, waiting to go out as Porgy, I'd hear Gershwin's love of Porgy, and it just settled everything. And I thought, I'm very happy being here.
Yeah. I mean, particularly when you perform a role as often as you have Porgy, is this more difficult or more easy to adapt to each director? Because each director has like a new vision of what Porgy actually is like, and what the crippling means, and what that love means, and what I mean, how tricky is it to actually to adapt to a director's opinion?
Well, fortunately, maybe I've worked with one director in most of the stage performances that I've done. And it's based on the Houston Opera production of Porgy and Bess. And so I haven't had to struggle much with kind of inhabiting the view of the director. That I was blessed to have felt really felt secure about. The main difference was that all those earlier years, I would only sing it in concert, which is standing up, singing an aria at a time, and then sitting down. And I realized later, once I was down on my knees, that there was a very different perspective of being on your knees and actually knowing what Porgy had to deal with in his life and dealing with his disability. And so I always found it's a big enough, long enough score that I've always found different things I hope to explore and reveal about his character. And I didn't ever really tire of it. It kept my attention and respect.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of talked a little bit about your way how you study for a role, how you portray a role, but how do you, for instance, you talked about concert performances. You sang Porgy standing up, then you
Yes.
all of a sudden had to be on that card. How did that translate into your voice, or does it translate in your acting of it? But how do you make it audible? This transition or this transformation of the character within you?
That's a great question, Eckart. Your whole perspective changes when you're down there. Your view of life changes. I mean, there are all of these figures that suddenly become giants in front of you because you're a third your height or whatever. And so it really does. And then technically, it's interesting. Porgy gets harder to sing as you go along. I think that when Gershwin wrote it and the initial performers wrote it, he kind of had a bass in mind for the first part of the opera, and then it becomes more baritonal at the end, which as a basic bass makes it very complicated vocally to try to work out technically. But I ended up getting so swept up in Porgy's plight that I felt comfortable singing the high repertoire at the end. But technically, there is kind of an advantage in a way of being down on the floor and feeling your abdominals and your core so present, because you have to use it just to kind of move around. You're using your core. And so technically, I've learned good things. I did a concert of Wagner arias around the time that I was performing these Porgies. And I think that I benefited from the physical experience of singing Porgy down on my knees, because again, you have to isolate those core muscles. And so it was a great challenge to try to meet.
Has there been an experience or a character that you absolutely could not see yourself in portraying, or that gave you a lot of trouble portraying because it was either such a bad character or it was so different from yourself in, I don't know, whatever aspect? And how
Yes.
did you deal with it?
Well, fortunately, I've been cast in roles that seem to be appropriate for my range. So and I think it's certainly at a certain point I was able to choose what repertoire I would do. And if I felt that I was being overly tested, if I had to sing all of Wotan, that would be a very different thing than kind of do a couple of scenes like I was able to do. I was fortunate enough to do. So I've been fortunate that the roles that have been offered to me have been comfortable.
Right. And so the total opposite question would be, there's so many, particularly for baritones, I feel, more so than for tenors, there are great roles in the opera repertoire, really great roles. If
Yes.
it's, Scarpia and Don Giovanni, I mean, is there like an opera character that you would love to be in real life, that you really feel like, this is me, I could be that guy?
Well, I think the roles I'm most drawn to are unlike me. And so the villains like a Scarpia, it's interesting that you picked out Scarpia in particular. The villain like Scarpia to me would be an amazing thing to sing, Scarpia. It rides high, kind of Verdi baritonish, but there's just so much to that character, so much evil in that character. In fact, I was really kind of bold when I was younger. I did a competition and I sang Iago's Credo. And everyone was looking at this like 18-year-old guy standing up there singing, black guy up there singing Iago, which of course destroys the whole conflict of the story, because Iago, I mean, I love that we start expanding our thinking about what ethnicities can play what roles, but the whole conflict is about Iago being white and not wanting Otello to be in love with Desdemona, who was white. Yeah. So there was definitely that undercurrent of racial tension in that opera. But all that aside, if you just look at music, which I believe has no color at all, it's amazing writing and a powerful role.
Right. You studied at the Juilliard School in New York City.
Yes.
And when you teach nowadays, and you've been on the voice faculty of Princeton University for quite a while, do you try to emulate your teachers the way you were taught? Or what is your approach to teaching how to sing and perform? I think teaching singers is one of the most difficult things because you can't really fix anything outside. It's all in here and you can't really see it. And it's all breathing and muscle. And I don't know. It's really weird.
It's very challenging. And I think if there's another advantage to being a lower voice is that you go through stages where the weight of the sound changes. And so I needed to get a tune up with different teachers at different points in my life every few years. And so, but one of the main influences of my singing, I actually learned with a teacher down in Southern California in Inglewood. Her name was Marion Cooper. And she had a very simplistic, but the kind of bel canto approach to singing that had to do so much with support. And I think she simplified things in a way that I think that I can relate that information to my students, especially the younger ones. And then I've worked with a lot of great teachers. Myron McPherson was one of my teachers. I worked with him the longest time. I worked with Armin Boyajian and also Daniel Farrow. And Daniel was already in his late 80s when I went to work with him decade or so ago. And so when I teach, I pretty much incorporate all of the information that I had gotten from these different teachers, based again on what Marion taught me. And then I also try to then have the perspective of the student and try to understand what their struggle might be and address the things that maybe some of my teachers didn't address with me. So it's been an advantage in working with different teachers over several decades and giving me a perspective on how to approach the technical development of singers.
With the rise of many female conductors now, I've been thinking about how, women move differently. So if a man teaches a man, it's going to be very different. Women just move differently. And I figure that women sing also differently. I don't know enough about it, but so you had a woman as a teacher, but I imagine you also have young women as students.
That's right.
Do you have to somehow change, or do you teach kind of the same things?
I am so happy to tell you that it's mostly the same. I mean, there are some issues that are a bit different in terms of blending the chest voice into the head voice, but you really still have that with the male voice as well. So I keep telling my students, I'm so glad I don't have to make this up. This tradition is so long and so proven, time-tested, that all I need to do is just impart that information. I've taught more females than males, actually, ultimately. At Princeton, I'm known as the bass teacher. So I've gotten many more males there than I have females. But I'm happy to know that there aren't a lot of differences in terms of the basic production, vocal production.
Okay. Well, you always learn something. See, is there, I mean, as a singer, you also have your hands in many different genres, potentially, depending on your ambition and also how on your comfort level. But I mean, you can sing opera, you can do oratorio, you can do pure symphonic works, you can do songs. Do you have a preference, or and why, basically, or do you try to really serve everything equally?
Well, I have a preference for compensation. So as long as they're offering and they're paying money and it's something I feel like this is terrible, feels like something I can do, I go for it. I worked with Dave Brubeck for 20 years. And Dave's music was, while he structured it classically, because he worked with Darius Milhaud, and it was always his hope to actually be accepted fully as a classical composer, as well as his jazz repertoire, it always had a jazz inflection. So I feel that in a way it's similar, because my goal is to try to help create whatever music and style and energy that comes from the conductor or my collaborator. And so I've done a very wide range of music. I've never kind of wandered into pop, because I think there are a lot of people who do that a lot better than me. But in terms of jazz inflection in singing music of different periods, very early music, very recent music, I just feel like it's a smorgasbord, and I want to try to taste every bit of it that my voice will allow.
Yeah. And your voice allowed the Grinch too, so you can go from Bach and Handel to the Grinch. You do everything, literally everything.
Absolutely.
I have one last question, and this is my favorite question. And because you can talk about so many things as a performing musician. We always have to keep ourselves in shape.
Mm.
So my question is, how often and how long do you practice? Is this like every day? Do you have a regimen, or are you goal oriented? So when you have a project, then you're totally into it, and otherwise you just let yourself go.
Well, that's the difference between the pre-COVID times and these times. Most of my practice in the past centered around whatever repertoire I was preparing. What, even if it were multi-layered repertoire in different locations and different styles and periods and all that kind of thing. And every once in a while I would sing something just because I felt like it. But the kind of the nice thing, if there's anything nice about this crisis that we're in, is that I can suddenly decide to just pull out a Dupac song and practice. For some reason, there's this repertoire that I've been drawn to in the last couple of weeks that I wouldn't necessarily have looked at in normal times. And so it's in some ways a privilege to be able to practice when I want and what I want. And so, and I would say as a routine, it's not a very strict routine. I would say that I practice at least 3 or 4 times a week, because I know that I'm going to have to get back up on that horse at some point, and I need to be in shape for that. But it's good to know that the voice is holding up, and this isn't something that's a foregone conclusion when you don't sing for a period of time. But I've been very gratified with the way my voice is still working, and reassured by that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you sound amazing. It was a pleasure working with you. So thank you so much for making time and for answering my question. I believe that our audience has some questions for you, so I'm going to turn it back to Kelly.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you both for letting us listen into this really interesting discussion. And to our audience, feel free to submit questions in the Q&A box. We do have some questions already, and this is for both of you. You have both performed in so many fantastic locations and many outstanding operas and performances. What venues have you found most moving or inspirational? And that's from John.
Kevin, you go first.
Should I go first?
Yeah,
I have
sure.
to say, I had the privilege of the honor of singing in Verdi's theater in Parma. Not only because it's Parma, where Parmesan cheese is from, and prosciutto di Parma, but the hall itself was actually built for singing. As a professional singer singing in different locations, different venues, you're in mostly symphonic halls, sometimes in operatic halls, or in Carnegie Hall, which is also an amazing place to sing, probably my favorite. But I have to say that the Teatro Regio di Parma, I felt like the sound that came back to me was better than the one I was making. It was such a beautiful theater and just the right size for the voice.
Yeah. I have 2 performances that I like to remember. One is when I played at Carnegie Hall. It is such a great space where there's a sound, just because of, basically it's all solid. It's like a half round solid. So the sound reflects directly towards you, and you hear so well on stage. And it's just a great, also, the tradition, and so many greats have been on that stage. And so it was just a great experience being on that stage. And the other one was when I was a little boy, when I was like 11 years old or so. I was in a church in Dresden, and it was like 3,000 or 4,000 people in that church, and I was high on a balcony, on the organ balcony, and I was singing, and I was like an angel. I was like floating above everyone else, and I felt like my voice was just taking off, woo, and I was just floating, and I was just such a great feeling, how effortless you can produce vocally, and you can fill a huge space. It was very powerful for a little boy.
Well, speaking of which, Sarah would like to know, you are both strongly committed to music education. What advice would you give to aspiring young opera singers and conductors?
Eckart, you can go first.
For conductors, oh my goodness. The conducting profession has gone through quite a transformation in the recent decade, because it's much more than just showing up for rehearsal and for concert and conducting. There's a lot that you have to do in terms of fundraising, in terms of marketing, in terms of working together very, very closely with the administration, with the staff, with the board, media appearances. I mean, there's so many things that you have to do nowadays. I would say put in many hours, night hours of work, and always remain human, because I think it is not. If you consider this a position of power, you're in the wrong business. People will always judge you by your humanity and by the humanity of your music making.
Hi, Sarah. I think that if you're going to consider pursuing performance as a singer, just make sure that you have, as Eckart says, this humanity. Your heart is in it. I remember when I was at Juilliard, my teacher told me that you have to take a vow of poverty if you're going to decide to become a singer, because the odds of success in this business, in any entertainment field, they work against you. So just search your soul and make sure that this is something that you're totally committed to doing. I felt that everything I did, including moving furniture in New York and all of these other jobs and having my electricity shut off because I didn't have any money, I felt that that was all part of what was going to get me to where I wanted to go. And so just search your heart and make sure that that you're deeply committed to doing it.
Wonderful. Randy would like to know who your closest mentors and how did they help shape your career?
I guess I'll take this one. I would say that mostly it was from inspiration. I've met some of my mentors. Leontine Price was my muse and probably still is. When I heard that sound coming out of her mouth, and well, I don't want to compare it to singing the Grinch in Portland, but I was just blown away by this sound and her power. And so she has always inspired me. But I would say that in terms on a personal level, I would say that, my parents and my friends are the people who keep me involved and encourage me.
All right, Randy would like, no, this is from Jean. Jean would like to know, what is your craziest live performance story? A wardrobe malfunction, a technical difficulty? Kevin, do you have one of those?
Well, there was one scary moment that I had during doing all this different diverse music and again, trying to get compensated for it. I actually toured with the Riverdance company for a year as a singer. They said, Kevin, walk out there, sing, don't move your feet, and come back off stage. And there was one time when I was hanging out in San Francisco with a friend of mine down below the stage, and you hear all of the dancing going on with Riverdance just above. And I realized that the music is moving towards this reprise that they had planned that I always had to do at the end of the show. And so I was just hoping my microphone was off because I just screamed expletives as I ran to the stage and just made it in time for my cue. But that was probably the closest call I had, the most terrifying close call I'd ever had.
And I believe we have time for one more question. So I'm going to choose Anna's question. What are some pieces you might like to perform, perhaps with the Long Beach Symphony?
Oh gosh, I'd sing anything with Eckart. It's a shameless promotion. But I would love to sing any number of works with the Long Beach Symphony. I actually stayed in Long Beach while I took lessons with Marion in Inglewood, and so I'm fond of the community. But I would say, a Messiah, or if Eckart and I have been talking about doing some Bach together, Bach is my favorite composer by far. So that would be my shameless pitch.
Well, we're really happy to hear that, by the way. So thank you. That's the last question we have time for today. Thank you both so much, Eckart and Kevin, for being a part of Long Beach Symphony's Musically Speaking series. We really enjoyed learning more about you, and we really look forward to having you join us, Kevin, at Long Beach Symphony.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
And
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Kelly.
Take
And
care.
thank you all to all of you for tuning in to Musically Speaking today. We look forward to bringing you our next program featuring celebrated Long Beach Symphony Pop's guest conductor, Matt Kattengoob. Thank you. We look forward to seeing you all again very soon. Be well.